welcome to Learning for Truth and Love. I'm Dr. Catherine Quinlan, and I prepare educators to engage students in transformational ways so that they can unlock their students' genius as well as their own. My goal in this podcast is to bridge theory and research and practice. Many are frustrated by our students' disengagement, by our classroom challenges, and mental health issues, whether of our own, our students, or society. We must attend to engagement and have real solutions for the mental health of all and for the well-being of all, whether it's our students, our educators, or parents. As I go through this podcast, what I'm going to do is share not only my expertise, but I'll also have guests. In some ways, I want to call them unconventional guests. Look, seeking answers from places that sometimes we don't often seek answers, which are sometimes the best places. I'm going to show you in some of my work just the type of questions I ask and give you some insights into how I prepare educators and how we should think about preparing to engage students as well. I'll share some insights into my own classroom practices and what I've done. And I'd like to invite you to ask questions, and hopefully we can work on this together to provide solutions. One of the things that we want to look at is just reasons for burnout, reasons for us being tired. Many are tired because they put so much into creating lessons and so much time into finding resources that connect with culture. And oftentimes we learn that it's not as effective as you think. I prepare students in STEM education, more specifically in science education. And sometimes I was given advice from people who were not STEM educators, who didn't quite understand that the nature of buy-in for science is very different than the nature of buy-in for humanities or other things. I know that as educators, some of us are resentful, and I've been through that phase, and I want to talk about, how I've gotten past that phase, and, some things that are still challenges, some things you get over and some things you don't. But sometimes when you're an educator, well, not sometimes, you do have a lot of pressure, and sometimes this can lead to resentment, right? Resentment that you're doing your best, and your principal or your chair, if you're in a university setting, tell you that it's still not good enough. So what do you do? Some of us are even frustrated, right? Thinking we've done all we can to engage and it's still not happening. So I'm excited about sharing some of my successes, but also I really want to delve deeply into some of the issues that are happening. And I want us to think of it differently. And that's really the key to this podcast. How can we think of it differently? I've spent a lot of time listening to figure out what it is I can bring to the table here in this podcast and what it is my guests can bring to the table, and what we should bring to the table when we're thinking about classroom practices. I'm also going to share resources and information I've put together, some free resources that you can use in your classroom along with these tips. So please join me on this journey as we go through this podcast. We'll talk about how to bring your own authenticity to the classroom. It's something even I've struggled with and continue to struggle with, I would say. But there are tips that I've learned, and there are ways that I've learned to be authentic. And I think I want to say that some of that development is even recent because it has been part of the challenge. And part of it is how we think about students, how we think about even our own efforts, how we think of our students' efforts and predispositions. Sometimes we're not always aware of our own predispositions, and usually we're not, because if we were, we would change it. It would be easy to change, wouldn't it? We're sometimes asked to change things we're not aware of. So let's talk about how we can make connections. So in sum, I work with educators with challenges, with creating engaging lessons and curricula, particularly for Black children. And this takes away from spending time with family. This takes away from your time with planning and creating lessons. So let's see how we can work on being effective. So learning for truth and love also keeps in mind that the learner is also the educator as well as the student. The educator can also take many forms, such as a homeschooling parent. I have 2 years of experience homeschooling my son. And so we'll talk about that too. And talk about the advantages, the disadvantages. We'll have some guests who also are homeschooling parents. We'll have educators on this podcast to figure out how we can all work together. So when it comes to the learner experience, one of the things that helps me is not only being an educator, but also a parent, and also being a parent educator. As part of this journey, which has taken me a while, I've spent years really trying to figure out the brain, how the brain works, the psychology behind learning. So we're also going to talk about being a learner and being the educator from a parent perspective. And a lot of this, for me as a parent, the education at the home started, when my child was a baby. And so we'll have a discussion about that and just how we can link home with the classroom. In thinking about learning for truth and love, there are a couple of things that have come to bear as an educator. One is that when we think about truth is very relative, we've learned over the years. But in seeking truth, it's changed the way I've approached teaching students. I've come to see when I ask students to write a position paper, for example, that a lot of times it was difficult for students to learn how to use evidence. So we spent a great deal of time, and I spent a great deal of time scaffolding. What is evidence, what to look at, what to look for, what is data, which led me to training students to think about what questions to ask. What is a good question to ask? What is a bad question to ask? And yes, I know that we have this habit of saying they're not good and they're not bad questions, but I'm going to beg to differ. And it's okay to have bad questions because we learn from having bad questions. Okay, and we know it's not a good question because it didn't lead anywhere. It help us to accomplish our goals. So sometimes we just have to change the type of questions we ask, because asking the same question sometimes leads to the same answers. Or add variations, that would allow us to explore new answers. So, in approaching this, I want to share that there are just many things that I've disagreed with in terms of people thinking about learning and approaching learning, even in the classroom. I'd say I think it's over 25 years. I have to count this now. Yeah, I think it's over 25 years now of teaching. I'm going to say that I'm more convinced than ever that, many of us think of teaching in a way we shouldn't, and which makes it so difficult for us to understand. We talk about social and emotional learning, and many of these become cliche because many of us don't understand what that means. So I really want to explore that, because one of the things homeschooling my son has taught me and exposed to me and helped me to truly understand what that socio-emotional aspect means. But I'll be honest, you're not going to hear me using a lot of the lingo. I might use some of it to connect with you, but I really want us to have conversations and use some of my research backgrounds with your everyday language. So another thing that learning for truth and love brings to bear is the repeated patterns I've seen over the years. So I want to spend some time talking about repeated patterns. And most of all, what are solutions to some of these repeated patterns that we've seen that leads us down the road? I want to end by sharing why it is I added the love at the end of this, because truth is debatable. And much of what we're missing at the end is the love part, and understanding that love will drive our decision making and our and our predispositions and how we think about students and the direction we choose to change and who we blame and the level of responsibility we might take and how we'll approach one class or one type of people different from another. And so I want to end this podcast by sharing some words from a very famous text that we often read and we're often influenced by, but we don't necessarily talk about it because we know that sometimes it's a turnoff, isn't it? But it's an important part of learning because it's there and we learn from it, whether intentionally or unintentionally, which is another area of cognitive research, intentional and unintentional learning. Some of us are familiar with the famous text, 1 Corinthians 13, which states, and I'm going to read, "If I speak in the tongues of men or of angels, but do not have love, I am only a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal. If I have the gift of prophecy and can fathom all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have a faith that can move mountains, but do not have love, I am nothing. If I give all I possess to the poor and give over my body to hardship, that I may boast, but do not have love, I gain nothing. Love is patient. Love is kind. It does not envy. It does not boast. It is not proud. It does not dishonor others. It is not self seeking. It is not easily angered. It keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. Love never fails. But where there are prophecies, they will cease. Where there are tongues, they will be stilled. Where there is knowledge, it will pass away. For we know in part and we prophesy in part. But when completeness comes, what is in part disappears. When I was a child, I talked like a child. I thought like a child. I reasoned like a child. When I became a man or woman or other gender, I put the ways of childhood behind me. For now, we see only a reflection as in a mirror. Then we shall see face to face. Now I know in part. Then I shall know fully, even as I am fully known. And now these three remain: faith, hope, and love. But the greatest of these is love. I want to thank you so much for listening. It was really important to me, for me to read that. I can go into details, but I know each of you would have gotten something different out of this. Because as one researcher noted, learning is an individual construct. Unquote. Well, I'm going to cite a lot of different things to help you understand how the research might explain learning and the issues we're having in society, and hope that we can use this to help us move to the next level, personally or in terms of our career. It's all connected, isn't it? How we're doing in our career, in our teaching career as an educator, affect how we are personally. So how can we get ourselves to a place where we can not only enjoy what we do, but also unlock our own genius, learning for truth and love? As my first podcast, I'd like to leave you with I hope it's a treat. Years ago, one of the things I thought of exploring was being a songwriter. And I remember with what I was going through, I decided to, I shouldn't say decided to. One of the things I grew up with was music. And one of the things that influenced even how I raise my boy, including music. And so I one day I sat down and wrote 100 songs. And this was over 25 years ago. The reason I know is because it's before 2000. I think it was around 99. So I wrote over 100 songs and I had 8 of them recorded. And I went back to them and visited one of them and paid a professional recorder for. So I'll play that for you. I'm going to share this, my way of being vulnerable, let's just say, which is very, very difficult for me if you're like me, especially in the classroom. Vulnerability and understanding what that is and understanding what the boundaries are, is really important. And so we'll have fun talking about that. What are the boundaries between what's appropriately vulnerable and what's inappropriately being vulnerable? But I wanted to share this song because it reminds me of some aspect of what my understanding about love at a time, which depending on what year and what age, that your understanding about love will change, right? It's different from when you were 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, later on, right? Later on in life. Not only that, our context of what love means changes, whether we're in a classroom, whether it's with family, you know, and so I'm going to leave you a song that I wrote years ago Don't judge us singing. I'm not a professional singer. It's just a road that I had hoped to go down years ago and it did not work out. So I thought I'd have fun sharing some of the things that I've created over the years using both the other side of my brain, I should say, the creative side, and not just the research side. So thank you for listening. Thank you for joining. And before I play the song, I want to say, if you like this podcast, please subscribe and look forward to the next one. Thought I knew you, thought you'd care, but loving you has taught me how to love with wisdom, with care, thoughtfully. I've opened wide my eyes to the many